All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, it's still the Money Show. I'm looking at mass sack going on the banking sector. You know, not just too long ago, securing a bank job was a very big deal. If you actually did say, oh, I just got a job in a bank, they actually expect that you'll be going home with fat salaries and what have you. But there was this unglamorous nature attached to the banks, I think, after the banking crisis, isn't it? The banking job is supposed to be a conservative job, so to speak. I'm not a banker, but I think that's what they say. Anyway, joining me right now is my guest, Rislanuddin Mohammed, an economist and the former acting MD of Unity Bank. Welcome to you, sir, and thank you for joining me here.
Thank you, Nancy.
How you doing?
Good.
Your sector seems not to be doing quite well. I know you were in the banking sector for a while.
Yeah.
Of course, you headed Unity Bank for a while.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about the mass sack going on? Over 3,000 workers have been sacked in the banking industry, or perhaps over 5,000, yeah, from January till now,
Yeah.
if we add the new statistics to it.
Yeah.
It's not been easy. What do you have to say about that?
I think it's quite an unfortunate situation. My sympathy with my former colleagues that have actually lost their jobs. Having said that, I don't think it is as well easy for the management or the board of any financial institution, the bank for that matter, at least where I worked, to just sit down and count numbers and ask their staff to go. I think we should look at sacking staff, mass sack of bank staff within the larger context of what is happening in the economy. If you look at the data produced by the National Board of Statistics, for example, as at December 2015, GDP growth rate was about 2.11%.
That
Right?
was in 2015.
In 2015, it has already gone down to
0.36 contraction, yes.
negative. We are one leg in recession, technically.
Yes.
Now, even as at that time, 5 subsectors were already, because that 2.11% was some aggregate. 5 subsectors were already in recession. Construction, banking and finance, manufacturing, oil and gas, and government itself. So it's not a recent phenomenon. It's not something that should be looked at in isolation of what is happening in the larger economy. Just 2 days ago, NBS also came up with the data that 1.5 million jobs were lost in one quarter, this first quarter. And those are reflections of an economy that is in recession. If an economy is in recession, the businesses are not working well, profitability is challenged, and naturally people get into a miserable situation. The miserable index will begin to go up. That is the situation we are into. I do not think it is right. This is my personal opinion. I do not think it is right. It is right for the government to say, come, let us dialogue. Section 20 of the Labour Act
yes,
provide for that. But I think the government is taking it a little bit too far to ask a private sector organization that is not funded by government to tell that private sector organization, no, you must employ, or I'm going to withdraw your license. Do you understand what I'm saying? In fact, I don't know whether it is Federal Ministry of Labour that issues banking license.
No, it's the central bank.
It's the central bank.
Yeah.
And
the central bank also, though it's independent, is also an organ of government.
It is an organ of government, but it's independent.
Yes.
And there are certain guidelines within which banks must operate. There are prudential ratios that those banks must comply with. Liquidity ratio, capital adequacy ratio, and so on and so forth. Cash reserve ratio, and so on and so forth. If economy is in recession, those key ratios could have been challenged. And I did mention oil and gas. Most of the banks that reported huge losses were as a result of challenges they have had with their loans, huge loan loss provision on oil and gas sector. Now, they are operating suboptimally. all banks want to expand. No bank want to contract. No bank want to operate in one region or in one state or in one city. You want to expand, and by expanding, you have to recruit new staff. So it is an extremely difficult situation for any bank to just sit down. I have personally participated in this kind of process as
Okay.
At least from 2006.
The process of sacking
The
workers.
process of declaring a staff redundant. It's not a matter of sacking.
Is it not sacking? Can we just get done with that nice English, as it were, saying that they are redundant?
No,
but you're asking them to go.
No, but it's
so it's a sack.
It's a legal term. It's a legal term. What the government should have done, ought to have done, is maybe the first step that the Honorable Minister did mention: call for a meeting, stakeholders meeting. There is the TUC, there is the NLC, there is NECA, Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, that represent the employers. And I expect the Federal Ministry of Labor to be an independent arbiter in such situations, which is what they have been doing. If they act as independent arbiters, maybe there may be an opportunity for 100 staff sack to come down to 50, looking at both sides of the situations, maybe. But I do not think it will, it sounds right. This is my personal opinion. I do not think it sounds right for the Federal Minister of Labor or Federal Minister of Labor to issue a threat that I gave you the license and I am withdrawing the license.
You said quite a number of things, so I will try as much as possible to take them one by one. You said it's rather unfortunate that this is going on at this time. The other question to you is that, isn't it just strange somehow? I understand the economic situation. Why I use the word strange is that this is a banking industry that was posting good returns, that was posting huge amounts of money as profits. Perhaps even when you were in the banking sector. You understand what I mean? That even when other sectors of the economy was not actually showing that beam of light, the banks will come out to say, oh, we're posting fantastic profits, we're giving dividends. In fact, some of these banks are even sacking staff, are posting dividends to their shareholders according to the last financial year statement. So isn't it strange that these are banks that say that they are doing quite well, though we saw a bit of, you know, downside or decline, especially in their profit margins this year? That's one. These are also banks that come out to say, oh, everything is nice, they're opening branches here and there. In fact, some banks also have branches abroad, even in other African countries. These are banks that are also involved in big ticket transactions. So at what point did we now get to this place? That's why some people are saying perhaps it's a sabotage from the banks.
Let's get it right. We can still go back to the issue of the economy. And we all know that Nigerian economy is monoproduct. We all rely on oil, whether you are into manufacturing, whether you need the foreign exchange, whether you are into banking, which is the subject of discussion now. We largely rely on government, whether it is for business or deposits, right? The economy has contracted, one. Number two, for about 2.5 years, government look at its own finances. That's about 2.5 years or 3 years ago. Look at its own finances and realize that something is going wrong with management of our treasury. Ministry of Agriculture has money in banks. Ministry of Defense need money immediately to finance its budgetary expenditures. And the only way Ministry of Defense can fund those expenses were for maybe the debt management office using the central bank to raise bonds or treasury bills, which means people are lending to the government. Who are the major investors in those treasury bills and bonds? They are the banks.
The banks, yes.
And when the study was made, it was realized that banks were highly liquid. average liquidity ratio at that time was about 50%.
Why were the banks highly liquid?
Highly liquid because they are holding government money. They are holding government money. So they were holding government money. You take government money at 10%.
And you borrow back to the government.
So exactly.
So the government was borrowing his own money from the banks at a huge interest rate.
A policy was put in place called the Treasury Single Account. Unfortunately, it could not be implemented at that time. We will have had this problem since that time. Because when you look at the balance sheet of most banks, not all banks, maybe 90% of the banks, look at their deposit liabilities. Go into details. Look at the public sector and private sector liabilities. You see that it has tilted so much on public sector liabilities. Now the money is not there.
Is it proper for the banks to say that the TSA is the cost for this thing, withdrawing government funds from banks? Is it proper? That means the banks were not doing their job.
I'm not saying that it is proper, but I am saying that this is the effect.
The effect, which was an anomaly in the first place, showing us that the banks were not doing their job. The banks were just used to armchair banking. I go to them with my 5,000 naira to save. If I need money or loans, they won't even give me.
In your opening statement, you mentioned something like that. It is true. Most staff get promoted because they can easily get public sector deposits. Most of those new bankers that you're talking about don't know anything about real banking, about banking operations, about treasury management, about risk management. They don't know. And most of they are the ones that get easily promoted are the ones that can easily generate those cheap deposits, particularly from the public sector. Over the years, the banks can sit down now in the context of what is happening in the economy now and reposition themselves, change their business model away from, and which is what they have been doing for the last 1.5 years or two.
So, ab initio, the banks were not doing what banking is all about.
I think so.
If you take a look at the interest rates in Nigeria, I think, was it in the United States or so that I was listening to just some days ago, and we were talking and we said, banks in the US are crying over, I think I was watching stuff over Trump, his casinos and all of that. I was saying that the banks were charging as much as 15% in the US. No business can survive with a 10% interest or 15%. But meanwhile, here in Nigeria is outrageous, 22, 25, over 30% from banks. So the banks, ab initio, were not doing their job.
The banks were just operating in sync with what is happening in the society. Interest rate has gone up. Now, look at even official MPR rate. What is it? It's 12%.
12%.
12%. Does it go in sync with what you are thinking? Because you cannot lend below MPR, can you?
No. But the banks are even charging outrageously higher than the MPR rate, because the MPR rate is the benchmark.
The benchmark, typically you expect banks to lend 12 plus 6 maximum.
The symmetric corridor.
Yeah, 12 plus 6 maximum, 18%. It depends on their cost, on the cost of the fund they generate. And once there is scarcity, naturally the interest rate will go up.
Is this a cheap argument, especially coming from the banks? Because the question will be, how much development have the banks contributed to Nigeria's growth? Talking about largely the economy. How much development? I did know that when Sanusi Lamido, His Eminence now, the Emir of Kano, when he was being questioned, when he came in as the CBN governor, appointed by President Jonathan, he did say that he was asked about question on interest rate and all of that. And he mentioned, and I remember vividly many years ago, he said that you cannot isolate the banks from the economy. The banks have production costs, there's no power, so they buy diesel, they are always on diesel all the time and all of that. But isn't that a cheap argument for the banks, bearing in mind that they have a very central role in promoting growth, not just of the economy, but of the Nigerian people? It's in Nigerian banks, isn't it? Yeah. They have our deposits. Why not just turn it around to turn the lives of Nigerians around? Well, is it a difficult thing to do than going after government?
No,
and government putting their monies and then borrowing back to the government?
No, going after government money is something that has happened. And like I said, it's not out of tune with the reality of what was in place at that time. Everybody rely on government. Whatever business you do, you rely on government. It is now we are talking about diversification.
So the circle, that circle
is a cycle that affects every sector.
What would you say about those that say that the banks are sabotaging the government for taking out those funds, the TSA funds from the bank, and saying, you took this thing out, this is what it is now?
It's not a sabotage. It's not a sabotage. Government policy allows for ministries and parastatals to give deposits to those banks. You understand? Government policy allows it. And government policy allows that I have excess fund, I can buy treasury bills, I can invest, I can do whatever I want with the money. So it is not, there is nothing like sabotage. There is nothing like sabotage. Government policy allowed it. And government realized that those policies were wrong. And the TSA came about. So the challenge for the banks now is to absorb, they are still here to absorb the shock of a TSA. I agree with you, is for them to absorb the shock and move on. To absorb the shock of a TSA. TSA has hit hard on banks, no two ways about it.
What Dr. Chris Ngige, the Minister of Labour and Employment, does say in Switzerland, does it make sense? Does it hold water to say that, okay, we are threatening to revoke the licenses of banks? Is it proper?
No.
Why?
No, it is
isn't
not
it in the
why?
interest of the government to protect its people?
It is the responsibility of the government to protect its own people, but we shall operate within the ambit of the law. And the regulatory framework, the organ that is responsible for regulating banking industry is the Central Bank of Nigeria. If the CBN finds out that any bank has decided to sack its own staff without following due rules and regulations as provided by the Labour Act, then they can sanction that bank, but not Ministry of Labour.
So Ministry of Labour does not have anything to do?
Ministry of Labour can only come in, they can come in within the context of the Labour Act, sit down, mediate.
What should be the role of the central bank?
That is why I said the first statement issued by the minister is the right step in the right direction. Put a stop to it. Sit down, understand where their problem is, understand, let them be sensitized on the dangers of those mass sacking. Already, if you add unemployment and underemployment, we are talking about almost 31% or thereabout. We don't want such kind of a social problem, because in a plural society like ours, if you sack one person, indirectly you are sacking 10 or 15 people that are right behind you. So the first step is the right step in the right direction. If it gets to the second step, then it is not a matter of Ministry of Labour. It should be a matter of the Central Bank of Nigeria.
What should the central bank do now? Because it seems that, like, Diamond Bank has sacked, Access, First Bank, FBNH, which other bank? I mentioned, okay, Sky Bank, Echo Bank, you know. So it seems that one day one bank is sacking.
Yeah.
What should they do?
The Central Bank can mediate, not Ministry of Labour. The Central Bank can sit at the Bankers Committee, the committee of the MDs of bank, sit down, understand where the problem is, and see how they can mitigate those kind of huge sackings. But I do not think Ministry of Labour is the right organ of government that should intervene in such matter to the extent of threat. I do not think that will work, because now look at it. After the minister's plea, another bank issued a sack letter to about 200 staff within Sky Bank, Sky Bank or thereabout. Banks, assuming it is the Central Bank of Nigeria governor that comes out and say, please hold on, they will stop, because they know they are legally regulated by the Central Bank of Nigeria, not by the Federal Ministry of Labour. That's the point I'm trying to make.
But why is it now that the banks the banking industry is not attractive anymore? Why is that? Why is that growing? Why are we having that prevalence right now?
The key answer is what I said. We are in recession.
Now the banking sector.
We are in recession.
We are in recession, isn't it?
Yeah, well, 50% in recession.
Everything now will be blamed on recession.
No, it's not a matter of blame game, but it's a fact that the economy is 50%. In fact, we are technically in recession.
In recession.
We are earning about 1.2 billion over the last 20 years. It comes down because of this thing that is happening in the Niger Delta to less than $500,000.
The banks are also known for contract hiring, contract staffing. You go to most banks, some of the people they even have at the cash points and all of that are contract staff.
No, this is not a recent phenomenon. It is not a recent phenomenon. Normally, based on what I know, normally what happens is you come in as a fresh graduate, first as a contract staff for a year or two. Then you write an exam. If you pass exam, then you will be absorbed as a full-fledged staff of the bank. From my own experience, that's what we have done. That's what I think is being done up to now. So it is not as if everybody comes in. It is only the fresh graduates that come in as contract staff for a year or two. Then they will sit for an exam.
I can tell you authoritatively that there are still people that are working as contract staff for more than 7 years now that I know.
I quite agree with you. It may be it must be a misnomer. Something wrong must have happened. Something wrong. I know personally. I have that experience as well. Many people have complained to me that they have stayed for 3 years or 4 years without getting confirmed.
The banks have this attitude that when you are employed, they are doing you a favor. And of course, yes, the management makes you think that they are doing you a favor. The other thing is that perhaps they even earn less than 100,000 naira.
I don't think there is any favor in giving somebody a job. Because if you don't need him, you will not employ him. There is nothing like favor.
How about this attitude
you're not doing
also?
Any favor to
how
anybody.
about this attitude by banks sending ladies out, especially for marketing, to go get money, like pursuing all those public funds or government funds? Yes, because promotion. No.
That's immoral.
No, but you're laughing. You know that things like this happen, yes or no?
It's true.
So
but it's immoral.
But we shouldn't pretend as if nothing like this happens. That if you bring billions into the bank, then you are being promoted. Yes. It happens across the banks in Nigeria.
Yes, it does, across the board, but it's immoral. And like I said earlier on, I know from the time of Governor Sanusi, the first Sanusi, Joseph Sanusi, he has been hammering on that problem, urging banks to stop it, threatening to sanction them, sending their examiners on, examination, target examination to check all those incidences. I think the regulators did not just sit down and allow banks to continue doing that. They have been working at. I know for sure that, at least from my own experience, I know Governor Joseph Sanusi started talking hard to banks over those.
But nothing has changed.
Over those.
In fact, it got
over
worse.
those madness.
In fact, it got worse. Nothing changed.
It's quite unfortunate.
What should be done at this time
well,
to address that?
Well, the regulators have the power to sanction banks.
What do we...
They have the power to sanction banks that are found wanting.
You mentioned something earlier on that if the TSA had been fully implemented at that time, it would have still happened.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. It will, because, what happened was, when the TSA was done, most banks sat down and did what they call a pro forma balance sheet. Isolate government deposits. Look at your funding mismatch, risk assets and loan deposit liabilities. Look at where your balance sheet look like. Almost all the banks realize that they will have been in a terrible, deep problem without government funding.
So do you think that
from that day,
the banks there
are some banks that became proactive. I don't want to mention them because it's a public fora here, but there are banks I know for sure that became proactive from that date. There are banks today that do not even have any public sector deposit. Even when the TSA was withdrawn, the TSA funds were withdrawn, they do not have any. Even if they have, it's very, very negligible.
Do you think that the banks were also a strong force against the TSA being implemented at that time, during the Jonathan administration?
Banks lack the power to say yes or no. More so in a situation where the central bank at that time were the major promoters, promoters. That was when Emir, the governor. Yes, they were the major promoter that were insisting that the TSA need to be implemented, because they were the ones that could see those banks were playing at that time with government deposits, making tons of money, returning profit to their shareholders, while government are paying a lot of interest in treasury bills that they took from the same point, borrowing to themselves, lending government money to the same government.
How can the banks in Nigeria do banking the way it should be done? Because there's still a lot of opportunity in terms of retail banking. Many Nigerians are still unbanked. Many Nigerians don't have access to financial services, despite the different products we're saying, okay, promote, central bank is saying, let's go cashless, let's do this, let's do that. What should the banks, how should the banks conduct the business of banking?
I think the first thing, banks are learning or have learned in a very hard way. Now they should go and become more professional. Do the banking as it is supposed to be. Like you rightly stated, banking business is hugely conservative. Banking business is like, you are taught 1 + 1 is equal to 2, and most bank staff must ensure that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. There is no minus 2.
It's a business on trust.
Or based on trust. And we see how it operates outside this country. It is not something that you don't expect any bank officer to just go in helter-skelter looking for deposit, and if he doesn't get that, he or she doesn't get that deposit, he gets sacked. It doesn't happen elsewhere in other parts of the world. It doesn't.
Okay.
So let's be more professional. Now is the time. We have understood it in a very difficult way. Let them operate in a professional manner and promote people based on their professional integrity, based on their professional competence, not based on just generating 1 billion deposits.
Okay, let's take a few comments. Patrick Agoro says, I know someone working as a contract staff in GT Bank for 10 years now. Like I said earlier on, and earn less than 90,000 naira. You have more contract staff in banks. Akonam says, how can federal government compel financial institutions to keep workers they cannot pay? Big joke. Okay, Abba says, for me, it's not good to sack them. While Nat says, Mr. Dean knows that Nigerian banks have been lazy, but federal government was rash in TSA implementation. This should have stayed with the gradual method. Sabo says, for me, it's not good to sack them mass considering our situation. While Christopher says, I think Nigeria economy is the cause of all that, especially when the economy relies on oil and gas. Corey says, training to improve an individual remains the best option. Pushing them off the jobs develops the insecurity we are battling. While Kolawole says, why can't banks do without public sector business? Okay, Ijeoma says, it's really scary, especially with this economic downturn, but the banking industry is experiencing a huge setback as well. Adiola says, oh, well, what time is the program rebroadcast? Oh, it's a live show, Adiola. All right, Chidebere says, sounds very funny to hear government telling banks not to fire staff on their payroll. Lawrence says, mass sack in the banking sector is a misnomer. Many comments coming through, it's just buzzing. My Twitter handle is just buzzing. But what do you have to say just as we end the program?
Well, like I said in the opening discussion, is sacking staff is a very painful decision by any bank executive. That I know, at least from my own.
You sack staff before.
No, well, let me just
start redundant staff.
No, redundancy. There is redundancy. Like from my own personal experience, when we started Unity Bank, for example, in 2007, we have 9 CFOs.
Chief Financial Officers.
From 9 banks, because it was a merger of 9 banks.
9 banks, yeah.
You understand? We had 9 CFOs. Now 9 company secretaries and legal advisors. There is no way you can absorb those kind of people at that level. So some have to be declared redundant. That notwithstanding, it's a very painful situation because, like I said, whether you have a wife or 1 child or you don't even have, we are Africans. Being African means that you have extended family that are just like our own children, whether we like it or not. So, if you sack 1 person, you are sacking 10 or 15 people.
15 people.
It's very painful. Government, the decision by the banks to sack their staff must have been brought about by the realities of what obtains in the economy.
Okay.
Manufacturing have sacked their staff, hotels are sacking, construction are sacking, 1.5 million jobs have been lost over the last quarter. We know it.
Okay.
So solution to that is government should please sit down so that we don't create another problem from a problem.
Perhaps on another day I will look at, should the government also bail out the banks? But that's another day. How can the government bail out the bank when the government is in need of bailout itself?
Okay.
All right. Many thanks for coming on today's edition of the program.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Rislanuddin Mohammed, the former acting managing director at Unity Bank. We've been looking at the mass sack in the banking sector. But I must tell you that I would still take a look at it on another edition of the program because it's something that is really going on right now in our society. In the midst of all this gloom, please just be the best you can be. Also be that change that you want to see and just be positive, you know. God bless Nigeria. I'm Nancy. We'll see you all tomorrow. Bye now.